Hey, welcome to the Tom Bentey Media Podcast. I am here with Patrick Cunnane. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Nobody gets it right. Cunnane.
Cunnane. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for being here. He has a really interesting story to tell. He's a former Obama White House staffer, and now he is a current Hollywood screenwriter. So, very interesting career, and I'm really happy to have him on the podcast. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. I definitely have a weird zigzagging type of career, but yeah, happy to chat about it.
Very cool. So right off the bat, what is it like working in the President Obama White House?
I mean, it was incredible, right? It was my first real job. So I've been so spoiled in terms of, all the jobs that will come after it. Nothing will ever quite live up to it. I mean, Hollywood is really fun, but there's nothing like, walking into the White House. And the kind of cool thing for me, and again, just really, I got really lucky, is I joined up with the White House in 2010. So he had been there for about a year and a half. And I joined as an intern. I wasn't on the 2008 campaign. I was in college down in Florida. And I had been writing like op-eds in support of him for the local school paper. And my roommate said, because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, he was like, you like Obama, why don't you apply to be an intern? And that was the farthest thing from my mind, but I went online. Sure enough, you can just apply online. I did. I didn't get it. And then I applied again and got it. And so the very first thing I did out of college was I went and worked as an intern in the White House, which I thought would be 4 months, turned into 6.5 years as a staffer there. And the crazy thing, though, is a lot of the people who were at the White House at that time had been on the campaign in 2008, had started with him, even in Senate days or the state Senate days. Meanwhile, I came in and I knew President Obama as, from 1,000 miles away as the most famous person on earth. And then to be sort of thrown into a working environment where he works down the hall was insane in the coolest way possible. But it gave me, again, like I was the lowest level person there for a long time. And it just totally spoiled me because it gave me the coolest experiences a 22-year-old could ever have. And then I stayed there until I was 29. And it was just invaluable in terms of, getting to see people who are just phenomenal at their job, seeing them up close, seeing the dedication it takes. But then also, more importantly, I think, is seeing that they're also just people. Like everybody's got their flaws. And that was a sort of really grounding experience for me where it was like, okay, these people are the best at what they do, but they're also like worried about what's for lunch. And it just sort of, it doesn't put you on an equal playing field with everybody, but it gives you sort of a sense that like, even though you feel like you have major imposter syndrome, which I did and still do all the time, and I know everybody does, it does give you a sense of like, all right, we're all just doing our best here. And so that's kind of what I took away from the experience that I wouldn't necessarily have expected to take away from it.
And what were your day-to-day duties?
So when I started, so the first 6 or 7 months I was a media monitor, which meant literally I just watched the news, read Twitter, clipped the news and sent it out to like everyone in the White House. And it was an awful job. And I was not particularly good at it. I basically failed up. My boss, I remember, saw me one night leaving at like late, and I thought we had a nice chat leaving the complex. And the next day, apparently he told his coworker, Pat looks like death. We got to find him a new job. And then he helped me get a different job, which to this day is still the coolest job I've ever had, which was I was a press wrangler, press assistant, which meant they moved me into the West Wing. And I sat at a little tiny desk that was like this wide, but it was, 40 feet from the Oval Office. And wherever the president went across the country, around the world, to his daughter's, soccer practice or to South Africa, I went with him because the press has to go with him. And so my job, along with a few other press wranglers, was to literally wrangle them and be the go-between between the White House communications office and the president and the press. So it was getting them the information they need and also relaying what they needed to the White House communications office. And it was just an unbelievable experience. I did that for about, I want to say 3 years. I did it through the 2012 campaign. So again, that was a ton of travel. That was months of travel almost every day. And then I moved into slightly more, substantive role in terms of writing talking points and statements. And I had a really kind of fun, by the end, I had a really fun dual role, which was kind of a niche role that I don't know existed before or since, but I spent about 50% of my time helping to plan his events. So helping to sort of, I had the very fun job of getting to call people and say, hey, this is the White House. We'd like to do an event with you and the president, or even, calling people to let them know that we want to bring them in and have them meet the president. It was a wild experience. And so I spent about 50% of my time doing that, and the other 50% writing either talking points or statements from the press secretary or the president. Usually I wrote a lot of death statements. A lot of times when somebody notable died, I wrote the quick statement from the press secretary or president, which became sort of a weird niche for me. And then, that's sort of what I was doing by the end. And I never left that tiny little desk that I moved to in 2011, I think. And I stayed there till 2017 at this little rickety desk. And it was just fantastic. It was a front row seat to history, and I had no business being there, but I treasure the time I had there.
Wow, that's really impressive. So cool at such a young age to experience that. I mean, unbelievable.
It was wild. Yeah, definitely.
And when you're working at the White House, is it is it like a hopeful experience? Do you see like that you can make real change and difference, or is it discouraging because it feels like maybe nothing's getting done?
So it's a great question. I used to get asked a lot, sort of like, and this will get to your question, what TV show most mirrors the real White House? And I always told people the day-to-day is like Veep. Like it really is, like it's a lot of minutia, just office sort of interplay. But there were a lot of sort of moments in the Obama White House that were remarkable and hopeful. And so while I was there, while you could get really bogged down, watching the news, reading Twitter, ultimately it was a very hopeful experience. Now, again, I worked for President Obama. I'm a Democrat. It was difficult when in 2017, Donald Trump won. And then it kind of felt a little bit like, okay, well, what were we doing here for, in my case, for 6.5 years? Is it all just going to go away? Like, what was the point? There was a little bit of that, but really quick. The day after the election, obviously I was not happy, but President Obama called a bunch of us. He had heard, a lot of the staffers were upset. He called us into the Oval Office the day after the election, 2016. And he basically gave us a pep talk, and it was unbelievable. We were in the Oval Office, and here he was. It was his legacy that was on the line. And he was telling us, history doesn't move in a straight line. It zigs and zags. And a lot of you have known only winning your whole life. You're all young. And this kind of thing happens, but, it'll be all right. We'll come back. And then, so it was just a wild moment to have the president give, you and your coworkers a pep talk. And so ultimately that helped sort of make it feel like, okay, yeah, what we did there did matter. Obviously it was difficult leaving the way we left, but ultimately I came away from, the White House feeling like public service is something that I wish, and I ended up writing a book that was kind of a comedic memoir about my time there, but really it was sort of like a love letter to, young people getting into politics, sort of trying to make the point that it is worth it, even though it can seem awful. And, now more so than ever, I get it. It seems awful. I can barely watch the news, but ultimately it is worth it, and it can be really fulfilling if you're there for the right reasons. And so long as we get more people in there for the right reasons, I think that's a benefit to everyone.
Wow, really, really inspiring. So how do you transition from being in the White House to being a Hollywood screenwriter? Did you always have an interest in film and writing scripts?
So I always had an interest in writing. When I was, one of my earliest dream jobs, I guess you could say, was screenwriter, even though I wasn't a huge film buff or anything like that. And for some reason, I just gravitated towards, I could write what they're saying on TV or on screen. And so that was one of my first dream jobs when I was a kid. I used to write little movies on my mom's yellow legal pad, and I thought 2 pages equaled a movie. I was like, and then it kind of just went away. I didn't think about it a lot. And in college, I studied political science and journalism. And I took a couple screenwriting classes, but that was the extent of my experience in screenwriting. And then when I was at the White House with about a year left, obviously President Obama was term limited. I knew I wanted to get out of politics simply because I had the best job I would ever have in politics. It was just the best. And I knew nothing would ever live up to it. And so I started tinkering with like, what do I want to do? And I ended up just writing a half-hour political comedy pilot for TV. And again, right place, right time. My boss knew that I kind of wanted to be in the world of entertainment, and Rob Reiner was coming in for a tour because he was working on a movie about LBJ at the time. And he said, hey, why don't you give Rob a tour? I know you're interested in that world. And the funny thing is I almost didn't do it. I was supposed to be down the shore that day, and I was like hemming and hawing, like, all right, I guess I'll stay in DC. Thank God I did, because Rob, the tour was great, and Rob ended up hosting my book party, and he's just a wonderful guy. But I met a producer who was producing the movie Rob was making, and he took me aside at one point. He was like, I always thought political writers would make good screenwriters. And I was like, well, I do have a pilot for you. And it was like the cringiest thing, but I did. And he was like, oh, send it over. I'll read it. So I sent it that day thinking he would never read it. He read it and he called me the next day. He said he wanted to attach his company. And, in hindsight, the pilot wasn't very good. It was, my first pilot, but it was good enough not to sell, but it got me connected to CAA, which is one of the big talent agencies out in LA, and got me, an agent, and ultimately helped me, make the transition after the White House. And the producer's name was Tim White, and he was nominated for an Oscar this past year for King Richard, which he produced. And we still have a bunch of projects together. We've got one that, knock on wood, is hopefully going to shoot this coming spring. So that was kind of a life-changing tour that I gave. And it's one of those situations where it's very much right place, right time, luck, but also being ready for the opportunity when it presents itself, because I did have the pilot that I had worked on and written, not knowing if anything would ever come of it, if I would even show it to anybody. Obviously, I wasn't getting paid to write it. So it is kind of one of those moments where it's like right place, right time, but have the thing in the back pocket, be ready to make your elevator pitch, when the moment arises. And then, so basically what I did was, as my time at the White House ended January 2017, I went to New York. I pitched a book, was fortunate enough to sell it. And then my wife and I moved out to LA, and it was a bizarre transition. So I went from writing for the real White House to a fake one on ABC's Designated Survivor. And then it just sort of took off from there. And I sort of was able to keep getting work, fortunately.
That's great. That's really cool. And Rob Reiner hooked it up.
Yes. Rob and Tim and Trevor White. Yeah. That's
great. So what's your day-to-day like now as a screenwriter? How do you organize your time? How do you come up with the ideas, and how do you facilitate that?
So I wish I was better at organizing my time. I need to come up with a better system, but basically I would say, if I currently, actually, I can show you. I have a board. Let me see. I don't know if you can see that board.
Oh, wow.
So each one of those is a different project. And I think there's 15 of them up there right now. And so they're all in different stages of development. Some are completely written. Some I wrote on spec. Some I was paid to write. Some I wrote for a very small fee with a potential much bigger fee if the movie actually gets made. Some are movies, some are TV. And so what I try to do basically is whatever I'm feeling, sometimes there's a deadline, so you just have to work on that thing. But otherwise, it's like whatever needs the most work or whatever I'm feeling the most excited about, inspired by, that's what I'll work on that day. In terms of sort of how do I come up with the ideas, some of them are self-generated. The one that, to give a good example, and unfortunately, a lot of them I can't specifically talk about, but I can talk generally about. The one with Tim White, who was the producer I met on that tour, he brought me an idea, which I can talk about because it was sort of the first feature I wrote, and it was a romantic comedy. It ended up getting on the Blacklist out in LA, which helped me get a whole bunch more work. But it was a romantic comedy about a president and a prime minister who fall in love. He was like, could this ever happen? And I was like, I mean, no. And then I thought about it more and I was like, yeah, we could build a world where this could happen. And it was great. And so that was an example of, he brought me that idea. I ended up writing it. And now we have a director attached and, we're out to talent. And then another idea I brought to them, and same thing. Now we have a director. That's the one that's hopefully going to shoot in April. So it really is, somebody could just come to me, pitch me something, and I could think about it for a while, or vice versa. I could pitch, a 1-sentence idea. Usually, if I come up with an idea, the 1-sentence idea then turns into kind of like a 2-pager, and I send that to my agents at CAA as well as my manager, and they give feedback, very honest feedback, because it's not in anybody's interest sort of to waste time. It's really hard to sell things, and so you got to have, you got to spend your time on the right things. And so it's really, my wife asks me all the time, so like, what's the process on that one? Because they're all so different. It's like, sometimes I'm pitching to a studio, sometimes I'm pitching to producers, sometimes I'm pitching right to a buyer like Netflix or Paramount or whatever. And so it's definitely been a bit of a learning curve in terms of process-wise. There is no process. And so I'm trying to figure out on my end how to just most, best use my time. And for me, writing for a long time is hard. Like I can write in quick bursts, like a couple hours, and then I'm pretty much done for the day in terms of writing, and I'll brainstorm, or I'll do, general meetings with entertainment executives just to build relationships. But, I think it's really hard to write for multiple hours in a day. I find it exhausting. So that's kind of, I know that's just not fully answering the question, but that's sort of the process and the way things come about.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, for me as a writer, if I could do just a couple hours, 3-4 hours at most, and get some pages out of that, I think that's a lot. I don't know. Some people, I guess, can do it easier or more easy than others, but for me, it takes a lot out of you. It really does. Like, emotionally, like it's a grind. I think for me to get to the point where you actually start writing is tough, and then I get into a groove, and that groove will last for how many hours, and then it'll stop. But I'm definitely not the type that can just go on for days and just write and write and write.
Right. And the other thing is, like, even when I'm not writing, and I'm sure this is true for most writers, like, you're still thinking about it. It's still in the back of your head. So I find that taking a break from it is really helpful. And then coming back to it, and you can bang out, I particularly like, 95% of my work is in TV or features. And so versus writing a book, you can knock out 10 pages of a script in a couple hours. Whereas with a book, it's like very different, takes much longer. And so there is something like, it feels great to go knock out a page, get to page 20, finish the first act, whatever. But I do find that just taking a pause, like, suddenly I've got all these ideas in the back of my head that I didn't even know I had once I sit back down. But like, if you're just sitting at your laptop, banging your head against the keyboard, it's not going to be very useful. So constantly I'll sit and write for 20 minutes, and then, I'll be stuck. And so I'll just go walk around the house. And by the time I get back to the computer, normally I've come up with the solve, and I didn't even know I was thinking about it.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's such a great point, because when you take a step back and you regroup, it really just refreshes everything, and you come at it with a very different perspective, a new perspective, and you have better ideas a lot of the times that you can implement.
Right. And you can look at it, you're always too close to your own work, but you can look at it almost like an outsider, where it's like, oh, this is good, or oh, this is not good. But what if you're just stuck there, just like trying to fight through it? A lot of times, for some people it works and they can just get through it. Just for me, it doesn't. I need to like step away, go for a walk, go drive somewhere, whatever.
Yeah, they say driving is like the best creative inspiration.
It is because you're sort of you're doing some. I read an article about this, and I'm going to forget what it is, but like you're engaged in something, but not really. You can be thinking about other things even while you're just mechanically doing something else. I've also heard, showering, I think, is another one.
Yeah.
Going for runs is another one for me. I usually come up with, and I'll send myself a quick note in the middle of a run. I'm like, oh, that's what I've been trying to figure out for the last 3 days.
And that's just one part of the process, because you can have these great ideas, and I have tons of ideas that I keep written down, but what takes the hard work, at least in my point of view and my perspective is actually getting that and transferring it into something that's viable. Like that's where the kind of the struggle comes in for me, and I think for a lot of people.
Well, the advice I always give to people who, you know, either want to break into the industry or just want to be a writer is like, finish something. Like, everybody comes up with good ideas. I've got a million, you've got a million. The difference is finishing, you know, something, even if, especially in the beginning, even if it's not going to be something that's going to get made, even if you don't even know if it's going to be good, the muscle memory of finishing a script or finishing a manuscript or a book or whatever, it's a genuine accomplishment to do it. And so my advice is always like, because I used to fall into this, I would come up with all these good ideas, but it wasn't my career. So I didn't have to finish them, and I just never would. I'd write like 2 pages and be like, oh, this is fun, and then stop when it stopped being fun. But for people who want to get into this as their career, step one is writing, you know, finishing a full script. And, you know, understanding that your first one's going to be bad and you got to rewrite it. You know, the cliche of writing is rewriting is so true. Like, the one script that ended up getting me all the work, just it got me a ton of jobs because it made it onto that blacklist. I must have written 30 versions of that script. And it just takes a lot to get to a place where, you know, it's good.
Were you getting feedback all those 30 times?
Yes. So the producers are fantastic. They did King Richard most recently, so they were nominated for an Oscar. So it's like, kind of got to listen to them, and they're just genuinely really good. And they're extremely collaborative. We talk all the time. And so, yeah, it led to a lot of different drafts, but I was okay with that because I knew that it was getting better each time. And so when you feel like something is getting better and better, you're more motivated than ever to keep working at it, even if it's taking longer than you would like it to.
Yeah, totally. And you said it made it onto the blacklist. Can you explain a little bit of what that is?
Yeah, so I really didn't know much about this until I was sort of hearing rumblings that it might make it on, the blacklist is a list of unproduced scripts that are voted on by executives across the entertainment industry as the best scripts from that year. I forget how many there are. Maybe there were like somewhere between maybe 50 and 70 or something that each year. And so it's amazing. His name is Franklin Leonard, who started it, and he's a great follow on Twitter. And the number of scripts that are on that list that end up getting made the next year or even 5 years later is just wild. And so it was a real honor to be on that list. And the good news about the list is once you get on that, a bunch of executives from all across the industry then want to read the script. And so I did a pitch last night, and the producers on it were introducing me to the executives we were trying to sell to. And they said, we met him through his script. It was called Affairs of State. And the guy was like, oh yeah, I read that. And it's just amazing that platform that the Blacklist has created for writers. And these are scripts that, a prerequisite to be on that list is that it hasn't been made yet. So it's just giving, a real opportunity for a lot of writers, many of whom are unknown at that point.
And do you apply to it, or the producers?
No, it's sort of like one of these. The Blacklist has a number of services where I know you can send your script in to get feedback, and I've heard positive things about that. And normally, I don't recommend that kind of a thing to aspiring screenwriters. However, the Blacklist, I think, is the exception. But this is something separate where the script sort of goes around town and executives send into. It's a little bit opaque to me, but executives send in their favorite scripts to the Blacklist. And then it's just, if you get 6 votes across the industry or 7 or 8 votes, then you make it onto the list.
Gotcha.
I don't know the exact numbers, but yeah.
Gotcha. And for your advice for someone who's looking to break into the industry, who doesn't have like the contacts or the access, how do you go about getting representation? What would you recommend?
Man, that is the toughest question because I think about it a lot where I'm like, man, I got so lucky. I don't know what I would have done. I think the first thing you have to do is write a really good script because it's not useful to get in front of an agent or a manager if you don't have something that's going to get them excited. So literally the best thing you can do is write a great script. And then unfortunately it is networking, it's cold emailing. And that's really hard. Like that's the stuff that I hate. And I feel very fortunate that I got lucky and sort of got to slide by that just by that chance meeting. But again, like I had the script in my back pocket. So that's the most important thing, having it. And then, the Blacklist, not to keep talking about the Blacklist, but that's a good resource, I think, for people, because you can then, if you submit your script and it's great and people love it, it'll start going around. Like this is an industry where people, it's just the truth. They want to be in business with you if they think that you can be good for their business, right? So if you can get a script that's undeniable in front of them, you'll get represented because you'll help, their agents and managers, their business thrive. So I think it's a lot of, hustling and submitting your scripts to festivals, stuff like that. But I highly recommend doing your research. There's a lot of scams out there. A lot of places want you to pay a lot of money, and you just got to be, careful. But again, you have to hustle, and you do want to find the right places to send your material. But again, it all comes back to the material.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's no going around that. You really have to have something good first and then find those opportunities but you have to have that foundation.
Yeah, because the opportunities are worthless if you don't have the material, and potentially you're doing yourself a real disservice if you get in front of somebody with the wrong material. You sort of have one chance to make a first impression, and these people are reading, I'm amazed at how much, my agents and managers have to read every weekend. They're reading, God knows how many scripts, so many scripts. It's actually daunting when I think about it, because I don't want to think about how many scripts are out there. But it's a lot. And so to break through is difficult, but again, worth it. It's worth trying.
Definitely. And what's the pitching process like for you? I know you're going in a lot of meetings, you're trying to get these projects off the ground. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So the first pitch I ever took out was a half-hour comedy based on my book, West Winging It. And I took it out with a co-writer, Bill Chase, and then Cal Penn, who is obviously an actor, but he worked in the Obama White House with me. And we, literally took it around town. We went and met with executives and pitched it in person. We ended up selling it to Comedy Central. They didn't end up shooting it, but it was, a great experience. They bought it, got to write the pilot. And then ever since then, all of my pitches, for obvious reasons, have been over Zoom. And I love it because it's the same as this, except I can have, instead of looking at you, I have my script up of what I'm planning to say. And it's stress-free. I really enjoy it. A lot of people hate pitching. I actually love it over Zoom. But so basically the way it works is, so right now I have I'll take the feature one. So I have a feature that I'm taking out right now. We have producers attached, we have a director attached, and it's a remake of a Danish film, of romance. And so what we do is I wrote up a treatment, so probably 10 pages long, and with a lot of input from the director and the producers, we got it to a place where we liked it. And so then we had the producers came up with a slideshow so that the buyers are not just staring at me for 30 minutes or 40 minutes. They're looking at images as I'm talking that correlate with what I'm saying as we're trying to sort of build this world. And so for that one, and for a TV one I'm doing right now, I really enjoy it because for the feature, the director and I pitch it together. So we basically go on and off through the whole script pitching it. And that's a nice way to break it up so that it doesn't feel, monotonous with just me talking the whole time. And it can feel more like an interplay, and almost you can sort of act some of it out. And that's the same for a TV one I'm doing with a co-writer. And it just makes for a much more fun experience for the listener, because again, you got to put yourself in the heads of the executives on the other end. They're listening to pitch after pitch after pitch. And while you might think yours is really special, of course I do, you got to try to break through and not be boring. and try to make it a fun experience for them. And so I've really enjoyed pitching over Zoom. I know some people like to be in person, but for me, it's super easy. Also, I live in Philly now. I moved back to Philly, and knock on wood, my career's been fine. So that'll change. If I go into a writer's room, I'll obviously have to go back to LA, but on the feature side, you have a lot of autonomy, and it's been really nice so far.
Great. And lastly, as we wrap up here, Patrick, tell us a little bit about what's going on in the industry from your perspective. Is it changing? It's post-COVID. There's so many these different platforms and different distribution options. What's your take on it?
So yeah, it's complicated. I think that there's never been more buyers. There's never been more opportunity to sell things. There's also never been more stuff out there, though. So I think it's right now, a year ago, I think that people were buying a lot more. I think with sort of the Netflix like correction and some of the economic stuff that's happening with some of the companies, they've constricted a bit and are not buying quite as much. But there's just so many streaming services that it's a good time to be in the content business, I think, and trying to sell stuff, even if right now I think it is in a little bit of a lull, a little bit of a contraction, but I think long term, there's just going to be more and more opportunities to sell more projects. I think right now the industry is looking for, I don't know how to put it, like happy things, uplifting things, sort of popcorn type things. I think that's what the broader trend in the industry is. Then again, niche stuff like horror always works. And so that's sort of what I've been aiming more of my stuff towards, which is sort of naturally the way I write anyway, but gearing it more towards, hopeful stuff, funny stuff. I think that that's what people want right now, given the world we're living in.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And is there anything that we can see of yours, any projects you can tell us about?
The one that I'm really excited about is hopefully going to shoot in the spring. So I will be back with more info on that. My episodes of Designated Survivor are on Netflix still, I believe. And then my book is called West Winging It. Came out a few years ago, but it's out on paperback, stuff like that. And then, yeah, everything else is in development. It's a long slog, especially on the feature side. TV stuff, I'm taking out 2 pitches, which that's a whole lot quicker. So that I could have news there a lot quicker, hopefully.
All right, cool, man. Well, please keep us updated. And I can't thank you enough. This has been so interesting. Thanks so much for being a part of the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was fun.
All right, take care, man.
Bye.